The crystal chandelier above our private dining room at the Pinnacle in downtown Seattle cast long shadows across the white tablecloth as my grandfather Harold raised his glass. It was the night before my law school graduation from the University of Washington, and for the first time in years, the whole family was together. I sat there in my simple black dress, fork poised over the perfectly seared salmon, when Harold's deep voice cut through the soft jazz. "Sophia, have you moved into the new apartment yet?" I picked the Horizon Tower specifically because it's walking distance to the best firms downtown. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. The room felt suddenly too warm. The air thick. "What apartment, Grandpa?" Harold's silver eyebrows furrowed, confusion flickering across his weathered face. He glanced at Victor, then at my mother Elena, before turning those piercing blue eyes back to me. "The penthouse I bought for you 2 years ago when you got into law school." Victor was supposed to handle the handover. "It's fully furnished. Doorman service. All taken care of." Victor's face drained of color, his hand tightening around his wine glass until the knuckles whitened. "Dad, this isn't the time." But Harold's voice dropped, calm but edged with steel. "The time for secrets ended when you started skimming from the trust one set up for my only granddaughter." The word trust landed like a hammer. My heart slammed against my ribs. Elena's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor, red liquid spreading like spilled blood. No one moved. I stared at my stepfather, the man who'd married my mother when I was 14, after my real dad died in a boating accident off the Puget Sound. Victor Lang, finance director at Summit Realty Group. The guy who'd always preached about self-reliance and hard work. "What trust?" My voice came out small, almost childlike. But inside something was cracking open. Harold reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, scrolling deliberately. "The Bennett Education Trust. Started with $5 million the year after your father passed. I named you beneficiary. Made Victor and Elena trustees until your graduation. Should be worth about $7.5 million now if managed right." He looked straight at Victor. "You did invest it conservatively, like we agreed, didn't you, son?" The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Victor's mouth opened and closed. Elena started crying quietly, mascara streaking her cheeks. $7.5 million. The number echoed in my head. All those years of scraping by, double shifts shelving books at the university library until 2 a.m., surviving on peanut butter sandwiches and free coffee, wearing the same interview blazer until the elbows shone, turning down spring break trips because I couldn't afford the plane ticket. I had student loans I was still paying off with my upcoming junior associate salary. And there was supposed to be $7.5 million waiting for me? My mind flashed back to the signs I'd ignored. Victor's late-night phone calls behind locked study doors. Thick manila envelopes of cash that vanished from his desk by morning. Business trips to conferences where he'd return wearing new Rolex watches or Italian shoes that cost more than my monthly rent. When I'd asked Elena about the finances, she'd always smiled tightly and said, "Corporate perks. Honey, focus on your books." We'd never taken big family vacations despite Victor's success. Our house in Bellevue was nice, but heavily mortgaged. Victor drove a leased Mercedes. Elena deferred every money decision to him, even though she'd been a bookkeeper before remarrying. I thought I was the independent one, proud that I never asked for help with tuition. But while I'd been cataloging case law textbooks at midnight for minimum wage, skipping meals to stretch my grocery budget, mending the same pair of interview heels for the third time, someone had been quietly draining the future that was meant to be mine. Harold's forensic accountant had been digging for months after spotting irregularities in the statements. The trust balance now sat at just over $1 million. $6 million plus gone. Systematic withdrawals over the years, small at first to avoid alerts, then larger. A luxury cabin in the San Juan Islands bought for $1.8 million through an LLC in Victor's name. A yacht moored in Friday Harbor. Nearly $1 million. Failed restaurant investments. Classic car purchases. Private club memberships. Shopping sprees. Even a cash house down payment in cash for a vacation property in Whistler. Elena had known enough. As a former accountant, she'd seen the discrepancies, but chosen silence for the lifestyle, the country club brunches, the designer bags, the illusion of stability. Victor had spun stories about bonuses and smart investments. She'd let me work myself to exhaustion, believing the narrative that I needed to earn my way while they lived off my inheritance. That night in the presidential suite upstairs, with Harold's lawyer spreading documents across the mahogany table like evidence in a trial, the full scope hit me. Bank records showed withdrawals timed perfectly with my hardest semesters, the Alaska cruise when I was 18 that cost $45,000 while I worked overtime at a summer job. The kitchen remodel Elena bragged about for $70,000 while I ate one meal a day to afford printer paper for resumes. Victor's golf club dues while I walked miles to save on bus fare. The betrayal burned hot in my chest. A slow-building fire that had been smoldering for years. I looked at Victor. Really looked at him. Not as the provider who'd stepped in after my dad's death, but as the man who'd seen a grieving teenager and decided her future was his to plunder. "You watched me cry over student loan statements," I whispered, voice shaking. "You lectured me about financial responsibility at dinner while eating food bought with my money." Victor tried to defend himself, claiming he'd planned to repay it. That risky investments were meant to grow my nest egg faster. But the numbers didn't lie. The trust terms were clear: funds for my education and welfare only. He'd breached his fiduciary duty repeatedly. Harold gave him an ultimatum: sign over every asset acquired with trust money, or face criminal charges. Embezzlement. Fraud. The evidence was ironclad. Falsified statements sent to Harold. Offshore hints. Even plans involving a money launderer. As the hour ticked down in that opulent suite, my world fractured. The girl who'd prided herself on self-sufficiency realized her entire struggle had been manufactured. The family I'd trusted had hidden knives behind warm smiles. The slow dread built into a storm of rage and grief, setting the stage for the battle that would redefine my life. The next morning, I walked into the offices of Harrington Legal Group feeling like a ghost in my own skin. The same jeans and sweater from the night before. But everything had shifted. I was no longer just Sophia Bennett, exhausted law grad scraping by. I was the plaintiff in a case against the man who'd raised me. Harold and his team had worked through the night. Emergency injunctions froze Victor's accounts. The San Juan cabin. The yacht. Even his retirement funds. Summit Realty had launched an internal probe after discovering Victor had siphoned client funds to cover trust shortfalls, another $1.1 million missing. The fraud web stretched wider than my inheritance. In the conference room overlooking Elliott Bay, forensic accountant Patricia reviewed the spreadsheets. Systematic theft starting about 3 years in. Small test withdrawals. Then escalation. Your mother benefited, but claims ignorance of the full extent. Elena's role haunted me. She'd signed some documents under Victor's pressure. Kept quiet about lifestyle inconsistencies. Chosen comfort over protecting me. But she hadn't orchestrated it. Victor, desperate, tried contacting me through a burner number, begging for a private meeting to explain. Harold advised against it, but I agreed. Wired up. With FBI involvement since federal charges loomed for wire fraud and money laundering. The meeting at his attorney's office became the explosion point. Victor looked broken already. Rumpled suit. Unshaven. Eyes bloodshot. His lawyer tried negotiating a settlement, but I laid out the evidence. Every transaction traced. The final betrayal. Documents showing Victor planned to frame me for the corporate embezzlement. forging access logs suggesting I'd used trust money improperly to discredit me if caught. "You weren't building anything for me," I said, voice steady despite the storm inside. "You saw my father's death as opportunity. A vulnerable girl whose future you could quietly consume while playing the hero's stepdad." The rage I'd suppressed for years poured out in measured words. Victor snapped. Admitting the money let him live the success he craved: yacht charters, luxury watches, ego-boosting investments that failed spectacularly. It was supposed to triple. For all of us. But the truth was greed and resentment. He resented my biological father's legacy. The honest businessman Harold had partnered with years ago. Stealing from me was his way of rewriting that narrative. The FBI agents waiting outside moved in after his confession on record. Victor was arrested for embezzlement exceeding $5 million. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. The slow tension of years of deception detonated into handcuffs and rights read aloud. Elena reached out days later. Tearful apologies. Offering to testify and sign over marital assets. But the damage was irreparable. I chose civil recovery first to maximize restitution before federal forfeiture. The assets: cabin sold for $2.1 million, yacht for $950K, cars and jewelry another $1 million, plus hidden cash and accounts, totaled nearly $7 million recovered, plus Evermont settlements. Psychologically, the betrayal carved deep. Nights replaying family dinners where Victor praised my grit while spending my millions. The isolation of realizing love had conditions tied to silence. Yet it fueled determination. I passed the bar exam with high marks, channeling the pain into purpose. 6 weeks later, in the federal courthouse in Seattle, the plea hearing brought everything to a head. Victor entered shackled. Orange jumpsuit replacing tailored suits. Judge Harlan, known for stern financial crime sentences, presided. The prosecutor outlined cooperation. Victor helped recover additional hidden assets and testified against the money launderer, leading to broader indictments. I spoke as victim impact statement, voice clear but laced with emotion. He didn't just take money. He stole my trust in family. My belief that hard work alone determines your path. While I donated plasma for rent money, he vacationed on my inheritance. While I mended clothes for interviews, he collected luxury cars. The worst was the toast at my graduation dinner. Knowing he'd already sold my future, Victor offered a broken apology, claiming he'd lost sight of me as a person. The judge sentenced him to 20 years federal prison. No parole for 15. Full restitution ordered. A lifetime restraining order followed. The recovery process continued methodically: asset liquidations, forensic tracing of every dollar spent on family cruises, home upgrades, even Victor's golf dues. Approximately $8 million total restored and invested conservatively under Harold's oversight. I lived modestly on my new prosecutor's salary in the Horizon Tower penthouse that had always been mine. Now truly home. Mother moved back to her sister's in Portland, starting over in accounting at 52, signing away her share of assets. We maintained distant contact. Some wounds heal slowly, if at all. Harold became the steady grandfather I'd craved. Proud as I joined the King County DA's Financial Crimes Unit. The internal conflict raged. Justice felt both vindicating and hollow. Victor's empire of lies crumbled. But the emotional scars remained. Trust issues in new relationships, hypervigilance with finances, nightmares of betrayal. Yet it sharpened my empathy for victims in my cases. Months turned to a year. My first major case involved a pension fund embezzler mirroring Victor's schemes. As I dismantled the fraud in court, presenting trace transactions and victim testimonies, I saw my own past reflected. The CEO received 15 years. Each victory reclaimed a piece of what was stolen from me, not just financially, but in agency. Harold revealed an old photo of my father David, standing with him outside their first office. Dream big. Stay honest. Handwritten on the back. It sits on my desk. A reminder of the legacy I carry. A letter arrived from prison. Victor reflected on his crimes, teaching financial literacy to inmates, acknowledging he'd stolen more than money, my innocence and faith in people. I burned it. Some closures come without reconciliation. The psychological journey involved therapy unpacking complex grief, mourning the father figure Victor pretended to be, forgiving myself for missing signs, rebuilding self-worth independent of wealth. The trust grew steadily. Funding scholarships through the Bennett Foundation for children who've lost parents, ensuring no one else faces stolen futures. Socially, the scandal made headlines, but I focused inward. Friendships deepened with those who stood by me. Romance came cautiously, seeking partners who valued integrity over appearances. 2 years post-sentencing, at a gala for foster youth education funds, I gave the keynote. Betrayal by those closest cuts deepest. But it teaches resilience. The money was secondary to the trust shattered. Yet from that darkness comes light, using my experience to protect others. Standing ovation. Harold in front row. Eyes misty. Back in my penthouse. Case files spread across the desk. I worked late prosecuting another fraud ring. The $8 million in trust grows. But true wealth lies in purpose, prosecuting financial predators, mentoring young lawyers, honoring my father's honest path over Victor's corruption. The lingering question haunts: how do we truly know the people we call family? When love masks greed, when sacrifice hides theft, what remains of loyalty? My story proves betrayal can forge unbreakable strength. But the scars remind us vigilance and integrity matter most. In Seattle's rainy nights, I stand not as victim, but survivor, prosecutor, advocate, daughter reclaiming her narrative one case at a time. The girl who once struggled now ensures justice prevails, turning stolen years into a legacy of protection.